So about 9 months ago, I was asked to provide a title for this presentation, for this talk. And there it is, written in the program, Duality, Nonduality, and the Feminine Face of Awakening. And about a week ago, I looked at that and I thought, my God, what was I thinking of? What does that mean? What am I talking about? It's a bit of a mouthful. Duality, non-duality, and the feminine face of awakening. So, and as I sit here, I get this strong sense of being pregnant, yeah? This moment, being in this moment in its fullness, in its unknownness. It's a kind of pregnancy, it's a pregnant moment. So this speaking of duality, non-duality, and the feminine face of awakening is really about giving birth to something new. It's referring to a new frequency that seems to be permeating humanity. A new frequency that we could call a feminine frequency. But it has really not much to do with the return of an ancient feminine way, the goddess way, although it includes that. It's really much more about birthing something new, our capacity to give birth to a new consciousness, both within each of ourselves as individuals and as the collective of humanity. So what does this mean? What is it pointing to? What is it speaking of? It's pointing to a latent capacity within each of us, whether we're male or female, whether we're young or old, whether we're mothers or not, of a psychological birthing, yeah? A psychological birthing. And birth requires a collaboration, yeah? So what's really being born here is, if you like, a new kind of spirituality, although spirituality is a word that I will invite you to throw away for now, to suspend. I would say it's a new humanity that has nothing to do with the old way of renunciation or ascension. We've been handed down the patriarchal model of enlightenment, which is one of transcendence. Or we've been fed a new age belief that we will ascend to a better world. And neither of those ideas are relevant anymore. So, and I think Dorothy was speaking of this somewhat, the last bit I heard, was this split, this division between this enlightened or awakened state and the very messy and often chaotic human experience. It's no longer enough for these to be divided within ourselves. And it's amazing how pernicious this idea that somehow non-duality and the world of duality are not one and the same. There's still a subtle inner division that gets perpetuated even in the awakened state. And it's very subtle. Now, it's not about getting lost in duality. There's a lot of talk these days about embodiment. Yeah? The embodiment of awakening. But that embodiment is not an excuse to be lazy and simply get lost back in the world and just enjoy the juiciness and the earthiness of life without being fully rooted in the ocean of the absolute. Unless you discover wholeheartedly, 100%, totally, without a doubt, the truth of your essential nature as emptiness, then you cannot fully embody that emptiness as fullness. Yeah? So this whole shift towards this idea of embodied awakeness is not an excuse for being lazy. And the absolute resoluteness and ruthlessness, a ruthless compassion for the discovery of truth and the truth of who you are. Only then can that light of awakeness be fully embodied, and that in itself is a whole other journey. So when we speak of the embracement of duality and non-duality as one, it's a dimension of beingness that the mind cannot understand. To the mind, it's linear. It's either this or that. So it cannot grasp that duality and non-duality are not on a continuum. In true awakeness and embodied awakeness, it's a paradox. The deepest acceptance of duality as the non-dual experience is a koan, yeah, that opens the door to the inexpressible. And that has nothing to do with the mind, nor even with the heart. Because when we speak of the heart, we mostly refer to the emotional heart. This is something that is beyond both. So what's being born, if you like, is a new frequency. That gives birth to something that has not been really lived and expressed on a mass scale in the history of humanity. And part of that is the willingness to collaborate in that awakening process. What does that mean, to collaborate in the awakening process? To say a full yes. To be uncompromising in that yes. And that yes is not the yes of the ego or the personality, or the yes of feeling good, or the yes of self-esteem. It's a yes from the quietest part of your innermost being, which requires a surrender. It's the yes of the birthing process. And the birthing process requires a willingness. It's not an imposing of the personal will on anything. It's not an imposing of the personal will on finding this awakened state or making awakening happening or making a baby happen. It's a willingness to allow that organic process to take place. But that willingness is also a sacrifice. Just like a mother that is able to rest in the yes that roots her in the power of giving birth to something new. Out of the invisible realm is born the manifest realm. This yes roots us in the power of I amness and gives birth to new life. So you could say that we're both the mother and the child. We're the mother that gives birth to that latent quality within ourselves, that which is awake, which is our natural state, and not a transcendent state. It's one that gives birth to life, not removes us or detaches us from life. And we're also the child itself, the newborn, that comes into the world with open eyes, with innocence, in present moment awareness. And holding the potential of its highest vision. If you like, that's the birth of Christ consciousness. The light within is born into the totality of life, which includes both life and death, birth and death, dark and light. And in that there is a sacrifice of the self-identity, the self that believes it has any control over how things should be. So it's not an imposition of the personal will on life, which creates a division. The birth of light from within is about healing all division, healing all inner division, by holding the world in the unconditioned heart, the heart that has no condition on whether something is right or wrong, good or bad, light or dark. All of it is deeply accepted as the movement of life, as it moves through your experience. That's not to say that if we're not moved, to act in certain ways or do certain things, that movement is not allowed. Everything is allowed, but it's allowed within the untainted space of unconditioned awareness. So then movement in the world is love in action. Not love in action in the sense of doing good things or doing charitable things or taking pity, but the authentic movement of life as it moves through the awake, the open vehicle that you are in order to express and experience the full vibrancy of life in all its horror and in all its glory. Everything is exquisitely tasted. So this love, or this love in action, is total. Nothing is excluded from that. So in that sense, spiritual and human are divisions created by the mind. There is actually nothing spiritual. At least the concept of spirituality, it's helpful to throw that away and see what happens. To see what happens. When being spiritual and being human totally come together in our minds, in our hearts, in our actions, then there's no longer a need to look for anything that will make you more spiritual. You become a Zorba the Buddha. Yeah? Not a Zorba, where you get lost in the world of the senses and gratification and all of this. No, not just a Zorba. That was Zorba the Greek. And not just a Buddha, the way that we have understood Buddha as detachment and transcendence and all of that, but a Zorba the Buddha. In other words, when you have fully realized the truth of emptiness, the truth of silence, as who you are, when you are truly rooted in that, in all circumstances, in all places, at all times, when you live from silence as silence. And that has nothing to do with being spiritual and setting time aside for half an hour of silence. It has to do with having fully turned your attention to the vertical abyss of being that is at the core of who you are, beyond and beneath all beliefs and structures that create this sense of self. And that's terrifying to the ego. That's when we get a glimpse and then we turn back from it, where we want it, because it gives a glimpse of freedom. But then we turn away from it when it gets too difficult and the rest of life comes rushing in, and our stories come rushing in, and the personality comes rushing in. Then we go looking for a glimpse again. When you fully turn your attention and give yourself, sacrifice yourself, your psychological sense of self, every construct, the location of self in time and space, as a thing here, as a me, when all of that is given to that emptiness, to that abyss, to that void, to that not knowingness, over and over again. Then that abyss or that void which sucks you right in which you are annihilated as a separate sense of self, as a separate me, that black hole reveals itself to be the light of awakeness. And it's very ordinary. And that light, which is the birth of a new consciousness, when it flows into the whole of your life, every aspect, every nook and cranny, and then flows into the world through your interactions, through your relationships, through your work, through your relationship to money, through businesses, corporations, and everything that you touch and interact with. When that light flows into that, and it's a light because it just brings to awareness, right here in your face, those places in your interactions which are still operating from inner division. This is spiritual, this is not spiritual. This is good, this is not good. It's okay to have likes and preferences. Yeah, but I'm talking about something else. Yeah, talking about the division of what is worthy and what is unworthy, what is higher, what is lower. Yeah? So when the light of awakeness starts to pour into your life and into the world around you, which is your life, it brings to light everywhere where you still operate in division. And that's the journey of the embodiment of awakening. When that is fully embraced, as part of that journey, not just as a one-time state of awakening, a glimpse of freedom, but as an ongoing revelation, then this new frequency that I'm speaking of, which is just a way of speaking about it, I don't know if it's a new frequency or not, but then this, in some ways it is a new frequency because it allows the whole of the human experience to be included. Then we can say that the light is born into the world. And that has the potential, the possibility of changing not only how we experience the world, but how the world expresses itself. So the birth of light in you has really nothing to do with you, in the sense that it's not for you, it's not for your gain. It's really the getting yourself out of the way so that the world can awaken through you. The world wakes up when your experience of the world wakes up. when your experience of the world is one of seeing awakeness in everything, even in the darkest places, is one of seeing oneness in everything, because everything is born of the one, even if we don't like it, even if it looks terrible, even if it's violent. Not condoning violence or terror, but the seeing of where this comes from, out of what is it born. I don't mean on the mind of level of thinking, but what is this form that I am perceiving, whether the form is another person, or a nation, or some event. Seeing to the core of it, seeing that all forms arise out of emptiness and die back into emptiness, just as the baby is born out of seeming emptiness, the miracle of birth, and then that form over the time, or what we perceive as time, dies back into that emptiness, that formlessness. And if we're using the analogy of being a mother embraces all of that, has an innate understanding or wisdom of birth and death, and the interconnectivity of all forms, which are transient. All forms are transient, and yet undeniable as part of the human experience. I think I'm running out of time here, if that was possible. So okay. So maybe let's just take a pause and see if there's any questions or sharings. Yes, somebody over there.
I was wondering, so you're speaking of, you pointed to, there's these momentary awakenings, and I'd love to hear what you suggest in terms of a practice or a daily, in interactions, to allow for this embracing to manifest more deeply, to allow for this mother awareness, this mother flavor of awareness, to enter all these other arenas of life that have not been embraced.
I'm not sure if there's a practice. The problem with practice is it sets up another division. Now I'm practicing, now I'm not. If you drop that whole concept of practice or not practice, perhaps it would be more helpful to have the reminder to yourself to be willing to give attention, turn your attention to what is really here in every moment. And that means that if you give your attention to what is really here in every moment, you can see where the mind or some part of you is creating a division between you and your experience. So it's not necessarily about having a practice to love the world more or embrace the world more, but to see what stands in the way of that. Because this embracement is actually very natural. It's not something you have to do. Yeah? It's more the natural quality that emanates from clear seeing or an awake state, awake beingness. Yeah? So when we give our attention to the fullness and the totality and the intimacy of this moment, then we have the possibility to see what stands in the way of that. So it's actually having a much clearer view of the mechanism of mind that gets in the way of clear seeing. And that's a kind of, if you like, it's the willingness to be undeniably present, rooted in this. Yeah? And unwaveringly open to this. Over and over again. This and this and this. And then all strategies of mind that want or try or habitually have been conditioned to pull you away from that unwavering presence and unbounded openness to this will be playing themselves out and can be seen more clearly. And when they're seen, you're simply saying, and I'm willing to be more deeply present to this, and I'm willing to be more unboundedly open to this. And that's an ongoing practice, if you like, one that doesn't become something you do or don't do. It's a kind of honesty. Well, it's not a kind of honesty, it is an honesty. It's a ruthless honesty with yourself as to where you are giving your allegiance to the mechanism of mind that lives in the horizontal reality of past and future, that wants to pull you away from the full depth of the meeting with what is here and here and here and here, because it finds safety or security or stability or gratification in that movement or where it thinks that movement is taking it to. Being honest with yourself as to where you are giving your allegiance to that, as opposed to the sacrifice of that is required in the full depth and breadth of being here now and now and now and now and now. That's what gets sacrificed into the abyss of being. That's what gets annihilated and extinguished when you give everything to the unknown, the unknownness of this moment. And this unknownness is not one of stupidity or ignorance, it's one of being very open to all that is arising as your experience. There can be no division in that. The division comes when there is any attempt to move away from or contort or manipulate or contract around that experience. Okay, do we have time for another question, or where are we? Okay, somebody quick.
I can just speak relatively loud. I was so interested in what you said, and a few key words for me were collaboration.
Uh-huh.
Collaboration, this inner collaboration in our inner being to say a full yes to creating this so-called new frequency, this embraced state of being. And for me, at least, this initial kind of seed of awakening was a very individual process. And now this embracing, this sinking in has been facilitated by this collaboration with others around me and sinking in sort of together and feeling the importance of community who are all committed to, you know, riding this wave together. So I just wanted to see if you could say something about kind of physical collaboration with other of our fellow beings and the importance of friendship and loyalty and, community in that way. And I'm sure that's probably way more than you can maybe squeeze in 2 minutes.
Well, as quickly as possible. It's all of this is good, and it's all part of that unfolding and proliferation of life, because life is always proliferating. Life itself is always saying yes to more and more manifestations, some of those horrific and some of those inspiringly beautiful and uplifting. So everything is possible, everything is a yes. With reference to what you're speaking of, I think it's important, and I'll probably just say this, that the self does not take ownership of it again. Because there's a tendency when we speak of community and collaboration and we're all in this together and we are one and it's a global community, that the self-identity comes back in and somehow claims ownership of that. Yeah? And you've got to work out for yourself what that means, if that means anything to you. Because this new frequency, this new unfoldment of this oneness, if we're going to call it that, isn't necessarily about this concept of connecting with each other and collaborating with each other on that horizontal dimension, because there's still separation in that. In oneness, in true awakening, there's no need to connect or disconnect. The whole concept falls apart. Yeah, you discover, you cannot fail to discover that connection is an idea created by the mind or the ego that believes itself to be separate. There is nothing unconnected or disconnected by anything in any moment ever at all, and never has been. So you can't connect. You can only connect if you're outside of something or separate from something. So a lot of these concepts, even very beautiful spiritual concepts or concepts of oneness, will dissolve. So this is what I think I'm referring to when I say it's very subtle. Yeah? So look at yourself very clearly and see where there is any division. And when that division is surrendered, is sacrificed into the light of that awareness, then this real collaboration, we have to use words that have a kind of duality meaning to them. Words are always dual. But the real meaning of collaboration and co-creation, let's call it co-creation, starts to manifest through you as you, but without the self taking ownership of it. It simply happens. Whether you live your life as a hermit, in solitude, and the song of silence sings through you, through that apparent, and it's only apparent, individuality or solitariness, or whether you are singing and dancing with a community of people like-minded, open-hearted, with a common vision, a common goal, doesn't matter. Whether it's that one or that one doesn't matter. Whether it's solitude or community doesn't matter. What matters is the purity, if you like, the totality, the authenticness of that silence moving through you and into the world. It will take care of itself, but it will have a very different quality whether you take ownership of that as something that you're doing that's good, or whether you're totally surrendered to silence and the way it moves through you, the shape and form of that expression really has nothing to do with you. So, thank you.